gather round, children, and let me tell you the updated version of the Narcissist tale.
Once upon a time, there was a truly handsome Chad called Narcissus. Narcissus was admired by all, including an unfortunate Becky known as Echo. Echo pursued Narcissus, but to no avail. She was no Stacy. Echo was shy and could only retweet Narcissus. He eventually had to know who was his faithful follower, and Echo revealed her selfie. Seeing her for the normie mountain nymph she was, Narcissus rejected her and blocked her. Completely dejected and brokenhearted, Echo secluded herself to Tumblr until there was only a shadow of her username remaining. Nemesis, the mod of vengeance, stumbled across Echo's Tumblr page devoted to her beloved Narcissus, and was filled with rage and vowed revenge. Nemesis noticed how vain and self-absorbed Narcissus was, and found inspiration for his perfect #cancelled. While scrolling through Tinder one day, Narcissus swiped to find a handsome person he could not take his eyes off of. He gazed lovingly and longingly at this perfect creation. He could not see that Nemesis had ensured Narcissus would come across his own profile. While awestruck with his own visage, Narcissus wandered into traffic and died. A small flower is his memorial, forever mourning the perfect face of Narcissus. Why make this video? That is an excellent question, dear viewer. Calling somebody a narcissist has worked its way into the common discourse, which is fine. It's a Greek myth about a guy who is totally self-absorbed and sort of warning against the dangers of being up your own butt, and it's worked its way into the lingo, just like saying something is a Sisyphean or Herculean task, or calling somebody a Debbie Downer. It's part of the lingo. But there is another aspect to narcissism in that it is one of the APA recognized psychological disorders. So in that vein, it's more like calling somebody schizo or bipolar or OCD. These are actual psychological disorders that people legit suffer from. And so calling somebody that is sort of like diagnosing them and also sort of discounting the seriousness of those disorders. Hey, sometimes, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That person does have OCD, but saying it is an insult isn't really that helpful. My point in doing this video isn't to go all PC police on language, but just to maybe give you a little thought in how you describe somebody. Some people probably are deserving of the moniker of narcissist, but some people are just self-absorbed and not really in a toxic way that you do see with narcissism. So it's just something to keep in mind. Why me? You guys are full of such good questions today. There are a whole bunch of YouTube channels devoted to narcissists, being able to identify them when you're in a relationship with them, recovering from a relationship with them, avoiding them, things like that. It goes the full range from some people who gain their expertise on people with narcissism in the front lines in relationships with them and want to help other people avoid sort of the pain and unfortunate experiences they went through, up to and including people who are like counseling psychologists with PhDs or PsyDs or whatever, talking about the disorder and how to deal with people who have the disorder. As I've talked about previously, I am not a counseling psychologist. I am an experimental psychologist. So why am I doing a video on something that's more in the realm of counseling psychology? Why am I wanting to jump down this rabbit hole? Well, as is true with many things on this channel, I have a weird background. I have some experience with people with narcissism. Granted, not at the intimate level that a lot of people in the YouTube community have had, more at an arm's length. And I also have a background in science dissemination. And so I think this combination might be useful in trying to get out information about this disorder. Unlike a lot of people in the YouTube talking about narcissism community, I've been affected and I've been hurt in some cases, but I haven't been burned that to the same level that a lot of people in the YouTube community have been. And so I might have an easier time talking about some of the toxic or unfortunate aspects of being in a relationship or dealing with people with narcissism. To say it another way, I have a bit of detachment because I haven't been deeply hurt and burned and traumatized by somebody with narcissism. And so with that detachment, it might be easier for me to talk about it just in a relatively chill way and talk about some of the traumatizing aspects without being triggered myself. Because of this detachment, I do have some plans for future videos on this topic. The next video on this topic will be sharing a story of a dear friend who went through this experience and wants her story out there. Beyond that, I do have plans, and I don't want these plans to get scooped, so stay tuned. Now that we got why I'm doing this out of the way, let's talk about what narcissism is. What do you think of when I say a narc? If you went to high school where I did, a narc can mean a security guard at the high school. I don't know why we call the security guards at the high school narcs, but we did. It was kind of funny. It can also mean a narcotics agent. So somebody who is working for like the DEA or other drug investigation police things. Those are frequently called narcs. Finally, we've got the narcs relevant to this video. In the YouTube narcissism community, a lot of times the community members will refer to the person with narcissistic personality disorder as a narc. It's an easy way to shorthand it, and it also is a way to sort of detach themselves from it, label the person, gain some emotional distance. As I was working on this episode, the thought hit me. It's kind of interesting, so I thought I'd share it. For the American Psychological Association, it's a bit gauche to refer to somebody as their condition. What do I mean by that? So examples of this, other than a narc, would be the schizophrenic, the bipolar chick, the autistic kid. It puts their disorder right at the forefront. The APA standard, when talking about people with disorders, is a bit more wordy, but de-emphasizes how central that condition is to the person's identity. The guy with schizophrenia, the chick with bipolar disorder, the kid with autism. It's a language thing, and again, some people get upset by this because it is wordier, but it basically puts the person first and the disorder second. So the chick with bipolar disorder. I am not the bipolar person, and that's the only thing in my identity worth talking about. I am a person with bipolar disorder. And so I'm me, and I just happen to have this thing. Doctors would be frowned upon if they went the cancer guy, the heart attack guy, the cancer chick. You know, it would be the guy with cancer, the guy who had a heart attack, the lady who had cancer. It's not the most important thing about the person, although if they're in the hospital, it is really important to know. It is a part of the person. It's not all the person is. To say it another way, a person is not defined by their conditions. It's just sort of like an add-on to that person's identity. The interesting thing to me then is for people who have been through relationships with people with narcissism, a lot of times they will refer to that person as their narc or the narc or whatever. And so even people who have some sort of counseling background, a lot of times in their YouTube content, they will talk about that person as the narc or the narcs or whatever. And so it's interesting to me that there is this disconnect there. I'm not condoning or condemning this language. Like, my friend's experience was awful, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I'm just commenting on it and also saying that when I'm going to talk about people with narcissistic personality disorder, I'm going to be talking about the disorder as NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, and people with NPD. So, other YouTube channels, you might be seeing these people referred to as narcs. On this channel, it's going to be people with NPD. Since this is the first video, really, where I'm talking about a psychological disorder in great detail, other than just offhandedly sort of like, I've got bipolar and my last year in grad school really sucked, I'm planning on revisiting a lot of these topics in other videos, but for now, we're just going to do a quick and dirty version to get down to where NPD is in the grand scheme of psychological disorders. Following other discussions of other disorders on this channel, the personality disorders are beyond normal personality operating procedures. So in the normal personality types and traits and quirks, some people can be kind of self-obsessed, some people can be kind of paranoid. You know, there's normal, average-ish, healthy-ish personality traits. And then the personality disorders go beyond that and go beyond it in a way that's disruptive to the person, disruptive to people around them, might be distressing for themselves or for others. You know, it's beyond just weird personality quirks. We've got the entire field of psychological disorders, and personality disorders exist in their own little subset. So we've got schizophrenia, bipolar, anxiety, somatoform disorders, a lot of disorders that are. We have a lot of psychological disorders that are not personality disorders. So what sets the personality disorders apart? Personality disorders are characterized by inflexible and enduring behavior patterns that impair social functioning. The personality disorders are kind of weird in the psychological disorders because we're talking about a person's personality that is problematic instead of just their mood or their connection with reality or their anxiety. This is their personality itself that is the issue here. Psychological disorders, personality disorders. So now let's talk about the psychological disorders before getting down to where NPD lives. The personality disorders can be broken into 3 clusters. There are the odd eccentric, which includes things like paranoid personality disorder, which is where a person has excessive levels of paranoia. So it's relatively healthy to have some level of distrust of others and their intent and the government or the big companies like Google and Apple and what they're doing with your data. It's good to have some healthy skepticism about what's going on there. The paranoia personality disorder goes more extreme than that. Paranoia personality disorder, they may be convinced that Facebook is collecting data on them to be able to catfish other people successfully as them in order to discredit them from future endeavors or something. It's kind of almost like the paranoia you see in schizophrenia, but without the other schizophrenic symptoms. So it's just paranoia. Another cluster is the anxious or fearful. An example of a personality disorder from this cluster is obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, or OCPD, is different from obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD. OCD is an anxiety disorder, OCPD is a personality disorder. And the difference here, just at a very quick and dirty level, with OCD, the obsessions are the anxiety, and the compulsions are things that the person does to alleviate the anxiety. With OCD, you may see somebody who is afraid that if they don't do something, something bad will happen, so they need to do something to prevent that bad thing. With OCPD, the personality disorder, it's more like perfectionism on steroids. The person wants things to be done a certain way because anything less would just be a disservice and a disgrace. So instead of doing things like fixing the rug so that the fringe is out so maybe people won't trip and break their necks or whatever, like there's a fear reason behind doing the rug fringe a certain way. With OCPD, the person needs the rug fringe to be perfect because otherwise it just looks bad and they can't be looking bad. The heart of why the people are doing the compulsions is different between the anxiety disorder and the personality disorder. And the final cluster are the dramatic impulsive, and that's where we are today. Before getting to NPD, I'll talk about the other erratic, impulsive, dramatic personality disorders to give you a sense of what else lives in this little neck of the woods. First is histrionic personality disorder. This is where a person compulsively seeks attention from others, usually by exaggerated emotional responses to relatively benign events. This is a type of person who may have somebody stand them up on a date and they go into complete emotional meltdown mode. They're never going to be loved again. This person stood them up because they themselves are an awful person. They're not worth loving. This huge emotional response that is just out of proportion for what happened to them. Another personality disorder in this cluster is borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder is a very intense personality disorder to deal with both for the person and for people around them. It's called borderline sort of as a relic. It used to be thought it was borderline to schizophrenia, but completely discredited that idea at this point. Hallmarks of this disorder are an instability in mood. So the person can go from very happy to very sad very fast. And so with this, there can be some confusability between borderline personality disorder and bipolar. So it's when you're first going in for a diagnosis with one of these, the clinician will be spending a fair amount of time trying to figure out, is it bipolar? Is it borderline? And so other features of borderline personality disorder are really intense and short-lived relationships. So this person may move in with a person after a week and feel like this is their soulmate. And then a couple weeks, a couple months later, the relationship ends in just this fiery explosion of awfulness. A week later, they've moved on to the next person. Another characteristic of borderline personality disorder is this feeling of emptiness. And so they have very strong emotional responses to things to try to get people to engage with them and to fill that emptiness. And it's a very hard disorder for people, both with it and for people around them, as I said, because of this emotional instability and this clinginess that can go with it and desperation to try to feel like they're filling this emptiness inside them. The main character in Girl Interrupted had that disorder. The third personality disorder in this cluster is antisocial personality disorder, more commonly known as the psychopath. That's the outdated term for it. With this, generally the person with antisocial personality disorder displays a lack of remorse or empathy or sort of normal feelings in wrongdoing towards friends and family or random strangers. The person doesn't have to be violent or aggressive, but they can be. There is a higher incidence of this disorder in the prison population than you would expect, just random sampling. So a person who doesn't feel like they need to abide by society's rules, not surprisingly, may be more likely to end up in prison. A dramatization of this disorder taken to a Hollywood extreme is the character Dexter. From Dexter, not Dexter's Laboratory. Important distinction. Finally, we are at Narcissistic Personality Disorder. The important characteristics of NPD are an inflated sense of self-importance, continued self-absorption, fantasies of unlimited success, power, and/or beauty, and need for constant admiration. When I taught this topic in Intro Psych, I would spend a fair bit of time talking about borderline personality disorder because I knew a bit about it. Having bipolar, I wanted to understand if it was the best diagnosis for me and also be able to argue with a certain psychiatrist, video for another day, about no, borderline isn't the best fit for me, and here's why. So I knew a bit about that. And also, Girl Interrupted was a pretty interesting movie. A lot of my students had seen it, so there was interest in the class to talk about it. I would also spend a fair bit of time talking about antisocial personality disorder because that's sort of like the big, bad, scary one as far as disorders go in the pop consciousness. And so I spent a bit of time talking about that, characteristics of that, where it comes from, things like that. And narcissism, I basically it's a self-important guy who thinks highly of himself and whatever, and just kind of left it at this very superficial level because as far as I knew, that was it. They weren't really, in my experience at that point, or my knowledge, aren't as potentially disruptive towards other people as something like antisocial personality disorder, but life experiences have changed my opinion on that, and I would probably spend a day at this point if I was to teach intro again, talking about toxic behaviors from people, what you might see those coming from as far as like personality disorders or psychological disorders go, and how to deal with those situations, because that's an important life skill that certainly I didn't learn until my mid-20s at the earliest. And my best friend Lily, unfortunately, had to do a lot of this learning in the field, as it were. And if she had known a lot of these warning signs beforehand, if it was talked about in her intro psych class, for example, maybe she would have avoided an awful marriage. In the next video for the NPD series, I will be talking about Lily's story. As I said, she wants her story shared, so I have her consent. And it was. Let's just leave it there. I'll talk about it in the next video, but before we talk about somebody's personal experience with somebody with NPD, let's talk about what the disorder is itself and what you can expect from it, how you diagnose it, things like that. For this, we are going to go through the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the DSM, which is the American Psychological Association standard for talking about disorders. And I'll note here that this is APA's baby, but the World Health Organization is working on coming up with their own to cover illness and disease and other things as well as disorders. There's also a push for one that's based on genetic knowledge, functional brain information, and other things to try to get at a finer level of detail for the disorders, because the DSM is sort of a blunt tool compared to that because we aren't really talking about genetics or functional brain differences. So there are alternatives in the work, but for now, most clinicians use the DSM, and a lot of insurance companies use the DSM when talking about disorders. The DSM 5th edition has two main categories of criteria for NPD. The first part is significant impairments in personality functioning. The impairment needs to be either in identity or in self-direction, or both, but you have to at least have one of those. So let's break down what's meant by identity. Going through the definition: excessive reference to others for self-definition and self-esteem regulation, meaning that their identity and self-esteem doesn't really come from within themselves, they have to get it from other people. And if somebody has enough clout or sway or power, you can imagine an army of yes men surrounding them and helping boost their self-esteem and feed their ego and make them feel good about themselves. The next part of the definition: an exaggerated self-appraisal may be inflated or deflated or vacillate between extremes. So with this, and I'm going to keep saying the word ego, and I mean that sort of in the broad sense of the word instead of like the Freudian ego specific meaning. Video for another day. Basically, the person has a very big ego and they love getting it fluffed, and it's also sort of fragile. It can be poked full of holes pretty easily. If you do sort of deflate a person with NPD's ego, you can expect the narc rage to come out. And this is a very intense anger response when the person's ego is wounded. And there is nothing like it. I'll talk about it in the next video because it just has to be heard to be believed. Their ego can take hits, but overall their self-image or ego level is pretty consistent. So that sort of distinguishes them from borderline personality disorder, where the person's self-esteem and self-image are just all over the place. Somebody with NPD, as an example, they might think they are the baddest mother in the room and the smartest person, and they have the best words and the biggest army, but it's a pretty consistent view. People may make them feel bad about that from time to time, and then you get the anger response, but overall, they're pretty consistent in their story about themselves. Tying into the last explanation I gave, emotional regulation mirrors fluctuations in self-esteem. As I said, when their ego is hurt, you will feel it. There is a very strong anger, wrath, vengeance response when their ego is hurt. This can be just an emotional outburst. It can be a physical outburst for some, or sort of paradoxically, it can be just shutting down any and all affection or acknowledgement of the offender as a human being. So to tie this all together, the person with NPD likes having their ego fluffed. They like feeling good about themselves. And if somebody's making them feel good, they'll return the favor. A person with NPD can be very persuasive and manipulative in how they treat other people because they need that positive energy coming in. And if that positive energy is denied or rejected or wounded, then you get that narc rage, that strong emotional response from them. So basically, if they're unhappy, they want everybody else around them to be unhappy too. Another part of this I just want to mention really quick is a lot of times somebody with NPD will have a narrative about themselves and other people. This is their own version of reality, and they will try to push this version of reality on other people. So they may think that they are so tough and smart and everything else, and they want other people to believe that about themselves. And they may say that other people are weak and stupid, and they will try to get other people around them to believe that about this other person. Impairments in self-functioning, we have identity or self-direction. The average, happy, healthy, average person will make goals for themselves, mostly. They might do it for some family attention or for friends or whatever, but for the most part, it's for themselves. For somebody with NPD, though, the goal seeking is more for the admiration or attention of other people and not necessarily for themselves. To take this into a more realistic definition, instead of becoming a police officer or elected official to try to help the country run better or to make people safe, they do it because of the clout it will gain them and the power it will give them and how other people will view them instead of trying to make the world a better place. And certainly it's normal to want to become a police officer, professor, or whatever for a little bit of like, yeah, I'm cool. But there's also, I want to teach people or I want to help people or whatever. And that's kind of missing from people with NPD's goal-seeking behavior. Another aspect of this is that personal standards are unreasonably high in order to see oneself as exceptional or too low based on a sense of entitlement. This can be they're a perfectionist because nothing but the best will do for them. They will not send out a paper that is not beyond perfect. And part of this perfectionism is because they are the best. They are the arbiter of truth and beauty and perfection. And so if they don't approve of it, it's garbage. Or their standards are low. So getting a 2.0 grade point average in school means that they should go to the best grad school because they are owed it. They can have a very strong sense of entitlement about the world and what it should give them because the world kind of revolves around them in their head and in their narrative. And so the standards for, let's say, being a police officer, they shouldn't have to pass a physical exam because they're going to be the best police officer anyways. And who needs to run as a cop? You're always in your car. The standards are flexible based on what the person with NPD wants at a given point in time. Finally, they are often unaware of their own motivations. To use the fancy terms, they lack insight into why they're behaving the way they are in terms of goal-seeking behavior. This is a bit of a screwy part. If you've never dealt with somebody who has NPD, once you've seen it, it can't be unseen. You can see the person trying to go after an advanced degree or become a police officer or whatever, and you can see sort of the motive behind why they're doing it when they themselves may not be honest with why they're doing it. And I know it's a little weird to say, like, I know their motivation better than they do, but it comes down to how they speak about it and their overall perceptions and worldview and everything else. And from that web of information, you're able to pull out their motivation when they themselves may say, I'm doing this because I'm a good person and want the world to be a better place, whereas they're really just in it for the power. So that was the impairments in self-functioning. Now let's talk about impairments in interpersonal functioning. So in addition to the self-functioning impairments, there need to be interpersonal functioning problems. There need to be impairments in interpersonal functioning with either empathy or intimacy, or maybe both. For empathy, there needs to be an impaired ability to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. From the outside, this can feel like you're dealing with a kid who hasn't quite gotten theory of mind yet. The person with NPD puts their needs and wants in the focus, and it can be very hard for them to understand that other people around them don't want the same things that they want necessarily, and that their needs and wants may go against the person with NPD's needs and wants. The second aspect of empathy problems are an excessively attuned reaction to others, but only if perceived as relevant to self. To say this in plain English, everything is about them, even when it isn't, except for when it's convenient for it to not be about them. The world revolves around the person with NPD, except for when it needs to not, when it would be blame or shame or consequences for actions. Then, nope, it wasn't me, it was someone else. But until then, all the glory, all the credit, all of the fanfare should go to the person with NPD. And the third part of empathy problems is an over or underestimate of own effect on others. So they can overestimate their importance and effect on others by thinking that everything they say is hugely impactful, everything they do really matters in the lives of other people, whereas in reality, it might not really matter that they let them through the crosswalk or let them borrow a pencil or whatever. But for the person with NPD, they're a saint for doing these things. For the underestimating part, they may say things that are incredibly cruel or hurtful and can't understand why the other person would be upset about it. If somebody with NPD is in a position of power and says things to their underlings that are incredibly hurtful, they might not realize the impact of what they're saying, especially given the infrastructure power dynamic that's going on there. Still in impairments in interpersonal functioning, we have the empathy, and then we have the intimacy. For intimacy problems for a person with NPD, the relationships are largely superficial and exist to serve self-esteem regulation. For people in a relationship with someone with NPD, they may feel like second fiddle and that everything that they do has to be to serve the needs of the person with NPD. It's been said by people in the community that people with NPD are selfish lovers because it can feel like you are giving and giving and giving to the person with NPD and not really receiving much back, because the relationship for the person with NPD is all about their needs, their wants, their drives, their desires. And unless they're sort of getting a mutual fluffing of the ego, they might not really try to build up the other person. The second part of intimacy problems are mutually constrained by little genuine interest in others' experiences and predominance of a need for personal gain. To say this another way, relationships to a person with NPD can be basically what can they get out of the relationship, not necessarily what can they bring to the relationship, just what can they get out of it. If they show interest in the relationship, usually it's early on, and it's frequently done as a manipulation tactic to try to get the person into the relationship, invested in the relationship, and not out of sort of a genuine place of interest like it would be for somebody without one of these personality disorders. Another aspect of this is that the person with NPD might get standoffish, impatient, ugly if somebody else is focusing on themselves for too long and not on the person with NPD. So you might see this in a conversation dynamic where somebody gets really huffy or makes everything about them. But then if you try to steer conversation away to your experience, you're being self-centered and a jerk for doing so because they were telling this interesting story and you always got to make it about you. Again, there's the two main parts for the DSM diagnostic criteria of NPD. There were the significant impairments in personality function, and then there are pathological personality traits in the following domain. And it's kind of funny to me that they have it broken up like this, and it's only one domain, but that domain is antagonism. And this antagonism is characterized by grandiosity and attention seeking. Let's break down the grandiosity. First, there's feelings of entitlement, either overt or covert. So the person with NPD may feel like they are the best, they've got the best words, they've got the best army, and they can be very overt about this, or they may be more subtle about this and just have this sense of entitlement that they're owed things, but not necessarily go around telling the world how best they are. Another aspect of this is self-centeredness. Because they are the best, the world revolves around them, obviously. If life was a video game, they would be the main character, and everybody else would be NPCs. Third is firmly holding to the belief that one is better than others. Again, this sort of entitled belief that the person with NPD is better than everybody, they're the best, they're the center of the world, and because they're the best, nobody else is. Nobody can even come close to matching their grandeur. As a consequence of being the best, or feeling like they're the best, there's a condescension towards others. Kind of unsurprising if somebody feels like they're the best thing since sliced bread. They may be kind of a jerk about it. Because they're the best, they feel like they are entitled to talking to everybody else as if they are lesser than them. This can go beyond just being kind of condescending to belittling or bullying. So along with these feelings of grandiosity, the person with NPD may feel like they're owed obedience from other people because they're the best. So of course, other people should follow their lead, do as they say, and not question it. Just give total obedience to the person with NPD. And then there's the issue of envy. For a person with NPD, if they are lacking something that somebody else has, they may be very envious of the relationship, the power, the success, the beauty, the whatever that other people have. And in that envy, they can get kind of snippy or nasty in how they treat that person or talk about that person behind their backs or to their face. The flip side of that is if they are more powerful, more attractive, more successful, they will feel legitimately that other people are envious of them. How could they not be? If they were in the reverse position, they absolutely would be. So of course, other people would feel as they feel. Also, in this vein, a person with NPD can be a master of shifting the blame off of themselves. So they're the best. They don't make mistakes. So obviously it was somebody else's fault. So we've got the grandiosity, and then there's the attention seeking. Attention seeking being defined as excessive attempts to attract and be the focus of the attention of others. Maybe you've had this experience. You're at dinner with a bunch of people, and there is one person just absolutely dominating the conversation. It always comes back to them and their stories and their experiences, and it's a bit draining as an introvert in conversations like this, because you're doing your best to try to contribute meaningful stuff to the conversation, and it can be very hard to when somebody's dominating and monopolizing the conversation. Another aspect of attention seeking is admiration seeking. Receiving attention from others isn't enough. A person with NPD may want the love, admiration, respect of other people. And going with the entitlement thing, they may feel that they are owed this. And so going back earlier in the video when we were talking about narc rage, if somebody isn't giving them the admiration that they feel they're owed, that can be a slight to their ego and they may respond as such. For somebody to be diagnosed with NPD, these traits need to be consistent across time and across contexts. So it needs to not just be them at work, putting on sort of their work hat and being the center of attention and domineering or whatever. This needs to be in every aspect of their life. Another thing to consider in whether or not to diagnose somebody with NPD is their social and cultural context. So for some cultures, it's more acceptable to be so sure of yourself and so about yourself, and in others, it's more frowned upon. The developmental stage means that you're not going to just diagnose every kid with NPD. Kids, by their very nature and what their brain's doing at the time, are self-centered. That's how kids are. And they're very interested in meeting their needs, their desires, and aren't so good at realizing the needs and desires and wants and feelings of other people. That's normal. That doesn't mean that every kid running around has narcissism. So it needs to be an adult who is acting in this way. Finally, this needs to be not as a consequence of something else. So other things that could cause somebody to act in this way are things like substance use. If somebody is very much in the addiction spiral, they can be very self-serving and very focused on their needs and not concerning themselves with the needs, desires, wants, feelings of other people. That's the addiction. That's not a stable personality trait for them. Although some people with NPD certainly can become addicts. That's not what we're talking about here. Why do some people develop NPD? We are going to bust out the biopsychosocial model of talking about psychological disorders. I think this is the first time I'm doing it on the channel. So, the biopsychosocial model tries to come at where a disorder is coming from a biological perspective. So this includes genetics and also brain function. There are differences in some disorders like schizophrenia, autism, OCD between people who have the disorder and those who don't. And so it's important to know when there's brain differences occurring, as it can help explain behavioral differences. The biopsycho, we're talking about psychological factors. These are things like on a local level, so the environment of the person when they were growing up, the impact that had on where they are now and what they're experiencing. And then social is more of the global context. There's differences between cultures in the expression of some disorders, like schizophrenia. In mostly Western cultures, if a person hears voices, they're going to be negative. They may be very condescending or just awful to hear, like, you suck, you're stupid, they're all laughing at you, the government's watching you, whatever, like very negative. Whereas in some other cultures that have a different cultural context for everything, somebody with schizophrenia might have a positive experience in hearing the voices. They might hear their ancestors talking to them. They might hear the gods or spirits talking to them. It can be a very positive experience for them. It's important to look at the biology, the psychology, and the social impact that are going into a person and the disorder that they're experiencing. For narcissistic personality disorder, it does seem like there's some genetic components influencing the development or the likelihood of developing NPD. There haven't been as many studies on this as something like schizophrenia or the mood disorder, so it's hard to say perfectly that there is a genetic cause, but there does seem to be some heritability of NPD. The home environment growing up is very important for the development or not development of narcissistic personality disorder. So a lot of times if you have a parent who has NPD, one or several of their kids might also develop NPD. If a parent is emotionally abusive, you might see a greater incidence of NPD in the children. If a parent is just emotionally neglectful or immature, there is a higher than background rate of developing NPD in those kids. And certainly, this doesn't mean that if a kid has a narcissistic parent, that they're doomed to grow up with NPD. There's certainly other resilience factors, genetic factors, cultural factors that come into play and can boost that kid's resilience and prevent the disorder from taking hold in them. Especially in the YouTube community, but also in the research field, there are different varieties of narcissistic personality disorder. Maybe I'll touch on it in future videos, but I'm not really planning on talking about it here. Just be aware that there are different types of narcissistic personality disorder. Some are more overt in your face with the disorder, whereas others are more covert, subtle with how the disorder comes through. And even the naming of these different varieties varies between researchers. So it's definitely not as standardized as we might like. A person with NPD going in seeking treatment for the narcissistic personality disorder itself is rare. Usually, if a person with NPD is going in for treatment, they're going in for something else. Maybe they're having a depressive episode, maybe they developed a drug addiction problem, maybe they're going in for marriage counseling. You know, it could be any other number of things that's taking the person into a counseling setting, and then in the course of that, hey, so let's talk about some of these things, and oh, it looks like you might have narcissistic personality disorder. Maybe we should address this. And if a person wants to change, it does seem like they can. They can learn new coping strategies. They can learn how to empathize with others better. They can learn to take other people's needs into consideration. But the person has to want to change. That can be very hard for somebody with NPD to do because there are these characteristics where they think they're totally fine, they're perfect, they're the best. And so why change that? Okay. So that's it for the first video on this channel on narcissism. If you have any questions or comments, hit me up on Twitter or in the comments. I'll throw some references and other resources in the description. I am running a promotion right now on Patreon for the next 2 weeks, I think, where if you sign up to be a patron of mine, I will send you a personal thank you card. And I have some really cute ones, so you should definitely do it. And yeah, catch you in the next video. Bye.